I actually think, without being an expert on what's going on the West Bank, that the way the United States is using these walls is one step more draconian than even the Israelis, or at least the Israelis before the latest crisis, because the squeeze that's put on and the size of the enclaves that they create and the inadequacy of the supplies coming into those enclaves is so drastic and so dire that you feel like this is saying, well, if the Israelis can do this, we can go one step better. But the larger point is that we read in the paper, we're exposed to this idea that, they're walling off their part of Sadr City in order to protect it from attack. And what in reality is going on is they're walling off an area of the city which will guarantee it's sinking into deeper and deeper destitution.
Right, and then, of course, when people take those drastic measures that you described, that becomes the excuse, just like in the Israeli model, that becomes the excuse for the next round of attacks against them.
That's right, and then that is what happens. And, of course, the United States then began using air power against the Sadrists who were trying to blow down the wall, and they were using air power in the other parts of Sadr City. So you have that, but again, just to make this point, I mean, these people keep fighting this, right? I mean, in many ways they have no choice because they're facing families starving to death very often or being endangered in so many other ways that resistance is a logical thing to do. But I also think we have to realize that the fact of this resistance going on for this long has really, altered and frustrated you can only call it imperial design of the American government in Washington, right? I mean, when this war started, the Bush administration, and the Democrats, by the way, wholly on board in those days, right, looked forward to a short war, a home base for a very large American contingent in the Middle East, and a huge amount of pressure on Iran, oil flowing at twice, maybe 4 times the rate that it had before, U.S., the most powerful force in the region of the Middle East by 2005, really, they thought. And instead what they have is a situation in which the United States is looking weaker and weaker, and the idea of bringing Iran to heel has reversed itself, and it's now a matter that Iran has been strengthened in the Middle East and even had to mediate the battle in Basra, which the United States could not manage. And so this whole idea, the unipolar world that has been the guiding philosophy not just of the neoconservatives, but also of the Clinton administration and the leadership of the Democratic Party, that the United States should be the dominant force in the world and should be able to impose its interest on the rest of the world. This guiding idea has really taken a beating, and it's all because the Iraqi people are basically more willing to die fighting than they are willing to die being economically oppressed.
Well, it seems like they've really proven the point. I remember Pat Buchanan said that the high tide of American empire was at Fallujah in 2004, and that was it. The rest is all downhill from here. It sort of proves the point when you have the most powerful army in the world versus ragtag militias of guys with AKs and homemade bombs that really, I guess, in the post-Kalashnikov era, colonialism is impossible. Nobody can conquer anybody else's neighborhood where they don't have at least some semblance of, legitimacy there, where they're somewhat welcomed.
I hope you're right that nobody can do it anymore. I mean, because it does seem like our government is very anxious to do it, but I do agree with you that they certainly have not succided in Iraq. And
well, we know that they could just kill everybody.
If I was living in Latin America, I would give my prayers every night to the Iraqis, because I think, a lot of the relieved pressure in Latin America is a result that the United States is so tied down in Iraq. I feel very strongly that Chavez would have been militarily attacked by the U.S. if they had had the wherewithal to do it, for example. So, and the Iranians, of course, have to say that also, and who knows who all else.
Yeah, you make the point in the article that the Iraqi people, at least in some respects, would be in a better situation, at least, in the shortest term, if they just said, okay, fine, you Americans, you're the boss, you do what you want, whatever, and try to return to some sort of normalcy. That really, they've made this sacrifice on behalf of the rest of the world that they are going to fight not only for themselves, but to, at least in effect, break the American empire over the rocks in the Iraqi desert.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel that way. Listen, they got a taste of what was in store for them, and this is in my book. As soon as Bremer took over, he began an economic revolution that created a depression in Iraq that is unimaginable. I mean, in the American Depression, we peaked out at about 30% unemployment in some really hard-hit areas. In Iraq, it's fairly typical for unemployment to be over 50%, and it's often over 70%. And that unemployment was deliberately initiated at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the occupation, even before there really was a war. This is going to be classic economic shock treatment of the neoliberal sort.
And this was the Heritage Foundation plan you're referring to?
What?
This is the Heritage Foundation plan, the economic plans?
Well, there was an economic plan. The Heritage Foundation was involved in it. There were a bunch of different groups involved in it. But, it's the plan that Bremer instituted. I mean, the key element of it was the dismantling of the Ba'athist state and the shuttering of 192 business enterprises that were owned by the state, which accounted for 35% of the Iraqi economy. And with multiplier effects, for example, the Kurdish economy was dropped into a horrible depression, even though they didn't have any of the the state-owned businesses there, because a huge number of the businesses in the Kurdish area were wholly dependent on state-owned businesses. The leather business, for example, which employed 192,000 people in Iraq, and the center of which was the slaughtering of animals and the conversion of their hides into leather, was owned by the government, and they supplied the entire leather goods industry in Iraq all the way up through Kurdistan. When they closed down the slaughtering and hiding process, the entire industry was collapsed, and it dropped from 192,000 employees to 15,000 employees in the space of about 6 months. And of course, when you have this occurring in every area of the economy, what you get is complete devastation. And it's this economic devastation, together with a whole bunch of social devastation that the United States also caused in the infrastructure and so on and so forth, right? The schools being closed and on, right? That generated the rebellion and generated the anger that has sustained the rebellion. So they had plenty of good reason to be rebellious, and yet their reward for being rebellious, when they protested, instead of, getting some redress to their grievances, the army was brought out and they shot into the crowds. And so then the Iraqis started arming and fighting a guerrilla war. And
oh, come on, you and your chronology.
The reward for that was, for example, Fallujah, in which the entire city was destroyed.
Yeah, you just want to go and identify cause and effect and identify things that happen on timelines, but we create our own reality. We're an empire now.
Yeah, right.
Well, let me pick one fight with you, Michael, because I really like you and I have great respect for you, and I know you lean a little left, and I think you know that I'm a libertarian. But I want to ask you, as a personal favor to me, and this is something that you do in your article, could you please not call this free market economics? Because what we're talking about, sir, is fascism, right? We're talking about the U.S. Army pointing machine guns at people's heads and telling them what to do. That's not the free market. I mean, maybe if you want to give it ironic quotes or something, I'd accept it with ironic quotes. But this isn't laissez-faire. This is empire.
Well, I think you have a point. But, you also have to have you also have to go and scold the neoliberals, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The neoliberal economists who have, pretty effectively co-opted that term, free market economics.
They sure have.
So that the world associates free market economics with their policy.
So we need to not accept their lingo. I mean, I can call murder self-defense if I murder somebody, but I'd just be a liar, right? So let's not call protectionism and mercantilism and war the free market. We can, in fact, have fun pointing out that that's what the fascists call it, and aren't they a bunch of big liars?